Welcome to Reporter's Notebook, where we talk to the Washington Examiner's top journalists about the stories breaking on their beats. I'm Jim Antle. I'm joined today by defense reporter Mike Brest. Mike, North Korea has become the latest trouble spot. We've been in talks with them previously under the Trump administration. Those really haven't continued under the Biden administration, but North Korea has continued to be a major national security concern. What is the latest development there?
So North Korea has really ramped up its missile testing. And we saw earlier this week they launched roughly 24 missile launches, some of which went so close to South Korea that it sent emergency alerts to various people in various cities that were close. So it really was a very high tense day. It was an unprecedented number of missile launches, and then the next day they launched additional ones, including an intercontinental ballistic missile, which is a little bit of a it raised a little bit more of a flag for the U.S. and other countries, given it can fly a little bit further and go a little bit faster. So we really have seen a significant increase in tension on the Korean Peninsula as a result of these ongoing tests, now these daily tests. And it really, we've seen U.S. officials and even both South Korean and Japanese officials express concern that North Korea could go ahead with its first nuclear launch in 5 years.
I mean, because the North Korean nuclear program, which they've to some degree disputed, but not really compared to a lot of other governments that have been engaged in this kind of activity, has been a concern of the United States and the region really for going on 30 years. And it's the current regime there has been pretty bellicose in recent times. And so there's obviously a lot of concern about what they're up to.
Absolutely. We saw it even earlier this week and last week with the Pentagon's national defense strategy. We saw them mention North Korea as one of the major factors or problems that they have to address in the next decade. And so it really comes down to preventing them from getting a nuclear weapon, and them defying the U.S. UN sanctions. And we don't really know how to play out and whether North Korea will test their nuclear missile.
So this isn't really the only thing that they're doing that's sort of gone against what the United States government and our allies would like to see. North Korea has been collaborating with the Russians in their war in Ukraine.
Yes, so we found out earlier this week from the National Security Council that they have intelligence to suggest that the North Koreans are supplying Russia with artillery shells. Now, not only are they allegedly doing this, but according to the National Security Council, they're going out of their way to try and disguise these shipments by sending them through North Africa. And so we first heard them talk about Iran. We knew that they had mentioned that this was a possibility, but this is the first time that we've heard from U.S. officials that North Korea is actually going through with it. Now, we haven't heard that Russia's actually received these shipments yet, but we know that they are at least in transit.
I mean, so we know there are Iranian drones in use in Ukraine that were provided to the Russians, and it's an interesting dynamic as you have North Korea now supplying artillery, you have Iran supplying drones. There was this talk during the Bush era of the axis of evil with Iran and Russia and North Korea. And these governments, while all sort of rogue states and illiberal regimes, didn't really have a whole lot to do with each other at that time. But now it seems that they do.
Exactly. We heard earlier this week from the White House that Iran and Russia have grown much closer since the start of their war in Ukraine. And so, as you mentioned, we've heard from various Biden administration officials that not only did Iran provide Russia with drones, that they still are, there were Iranian military official personnel in Crimea teaching them, because when they initially got the drones, they weren't as successful as they'd like to be. So they brought in Iranian trainers, essentially, to make them more proficient on these drones. Now, we've also heard concerns from the various U.S. officials that Iran could look to provide them with surface-to-surface missiles. Now, that would be an escalation in the types of weapons provided from Iran. We haven't heard any indication that that's happening, just that that's a real concern from the administration.
So there's been another development in the Russia-Ukraine war where the United Nations nuclear watchdog had been investigating an allegation by Russian President Vladimir Putin, and they've come back with some early results. What have we learned?
So we heard about 2 weeks ago various Russian officials, including President Putin alleged that Ukraine was looking to build a dirty bomb to use. And that is a strong allegation. A dirty bomb is a conventional bomb that includes either chemical or biological material that spread the damage of of a bomb. So it would have a larger radius, more casualties, more people who would be affected by it. And so Russia made this claim. It was widely denounced as false by Ukrainian, U.S., NATO officials. Pretty much the entire Western leadership was in strong condemnation of this allegation, and there wasn't much to merit it. The Ukrainians went as far to welcome a UN team of investigators into the sites where Russia said they were doing the work to create these dirty bombs, and these UN investigators found nothing. And now this isn't much of a surprise because Russia has made a lot of allegations throughout the war that have not held up to some spotlight.
Right.
And so this is sort of another example in that where Russia is not cannot be trusted for what they say. But the other thing is it actually raised concerns among U.S. and UN and Western officials because Russia has a propensity to accuse others of what they're about to do.
Right.
And so there was concern that with Russia accusing Ukraine of doing this, they could turn around and do it. Now, the U.S. Maintained throughout the course of this incident and this scare that they hadn't seen any active evidence to suggest it was imminent or that it would happen.
Right.
Now they were just concerned based on the history that it could.
And obviously this all comes against the backdrop of all these concerns and anxieties about Russia potentially using a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine. So there is one area where Russia has done a bit of an about-face and actually done something that the Western world would largely approve of.
Yeah.
And that's re-entering a grain deal that they had withdrawn from. Let's talk a little bit about that.
So about a week ago, there was an attack in Crimea. The Russians blamed Ukraine. Ukraine didn't acknowledge that they did it, but it was largely presumed that they did.
Sure.
And so as a result of this swarm of drones that attacked a naval ship, Russia withdrew from the grain deal that they had agreed to through the help of Turkish officials back in July to restart Ukrainian exports that are vital to the global food supply. Now, so Russia withdrew, and it didn't immediately stop ships from leaving, but it was believed that it would happen over the course of a couple days. Now, after about 2.5, 3 days, they announced that they were re-entering the deal as long as things remain square. And so the deal is back on. Russia's back in it. Everyone is appreciative of it. And it didn't stop ships from leaving in the time that they had withdrawn.
And this will obviously have some positive impact in terms of food supply.
Absolutely. Ukraine is a huge supplier of a number of different fruits and vegetables, grains, that feed millions of people, mainly in Africa. And so there were major concerns of the food supply and the damage that not getting these exports out would have.
Thank you, Mike. You can read Mike and the rest of our national security team's coverage at washingtonexaminer.com.